How does change occur in science? How does it happen? By now, you've explained to a hypothetical talk show host why psychology is a science, and you can understand now the difficulty in even defining the term science. Whether we can define it to the satisfaction of everyone or not, we do know that it changes. Copernicus decentered the Earth. Leeuwenhoek discovered cells. Darwin provided a systematic and detailed argument for evolution. Physics gave us the atomic bomb, and Watson and Crick the structure and design of DNA. These are some of the ways that people propose that science progresses or changes. Perhaps science progresses as a gradual accumulation of knowledge. It sometimes seems that way, particularly with some earlier textbooks. Commonly, however, histories, in an effort to make them easier to grasp and remember, record that great scientists discover something novel or surprising or put their facts into a better model. The sequence of great persons and significant discoveries or events make history seem linear and continuously progressive. Some discoveries require synchronicity. The matching of the state of current models, the preparedness of the individual, and the availability of new technology need to come together at the same time. And new technology alone, such as the invention of the microscope and the ability to splice and dice DNA, change the world of science. Largely as a result of Thomas Kuhn's 1962 book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, many people argue that science changes as old models become unworkable and a new model overthrows the prior worldview. Is there a gradual accumulation of knowledge? Science is too messy to fit a uniform linear increase in knowledge. Some self-proclaimed new historians have criticized many older textbooks in the history of psychology for focusing on old white men and Western psychology. I believe some of these accusations are fair, but many of them are unfair caricatures of the earlier works and often miss the point. Edwin Boring, who wrote one of the most cited and extensive histories of psychology in 1929, is frequently criticized as fitting this description. However, Boring later expanded on his position, and even 90 years ago, he said, scientists were often limited by their current zeitgeist. Clearly, he believed science progressed linearly, but his position became somewhat more nuanced. What evidence would support a great person theory of scientific discovery? Here's some of my suggestions. The person should have a great impact on the field. Clearly, Copernicus, Newton, and Darwin had a great impact on science and the world and history. Perhaps a person should have an impact in multiple domains. Wilhelm Wundt, one of the frequently cited founders of psychology, contributed to physiology, physics, and the emerging field of psychology. We might also argue that the great scientists would have a long history of continuous productivity. Newton did, Wundt did, and many of the psychologists we'll talk about did. An otherwise surprising discovery might help. The discovery of the neuron and its connections changed how we thought about the brain. We will see that some of the great persons meet one or more of these criteria. Other frequently cited psychologists do not. We need to ask, when they don't meet any of these criteria, why they became so well known. Other factors are also critical. It explains why men and wealthy individuals were once more likely, and perhaps still more likely, to make scientific discoveries. Consider Charles Darwin. He married into the Wedgwood family, and his wealth permitted him an advanced education, the money to take a long sea voyage merely to observe and gather specimens, and the freedom upon his return to spend years tabulating and organizing and thinking. Devoting hours and months and years to immersion in a problem without distractions from normal life is a great benefit to the potential discoverer. Also, chance, as Pasteur said, favors the prepared mind. Consider some examples. Fleming discovered penicillin because he ran a sloppy lab. He didn't use it as an antibiotic because the medical field wasn't ready, and he wasn't able to isolate the critical material. But he was prepared to realize something unexpected had happened. Goodyear spilled rubber on a hot stove and discovered, well, rubber that could be used to make tires. Daguerre stored some light-exposed plates in a cabinet with spilled mercury, and the vapors led to his discovery of photography. If you don't understand that what you've discovered is significant, and if you don't have the knowledge to understand its potential, you won't make a discovery. Persistence is always important, too. Consider Darwin again. And Edison, perhaps allegedly, said, "I have not failed 1,000 times. I have successfully discovered 1,000 ways to not make a light bulb." Marketing, awareness of the myth of creative discovery, and self-promotion is also important. You need to tell a good story. Milton's Paradise Lost, according to him, was written in a muse-inspired frenzy. Einstein was reported to see things that others could not see, and understand relationships they could not understand, often while he was musing by himself while sailing. Kekule said that he dozed off in front of a fire and dreamed of the chemical structures gamboling like snakes, and when one of those snakes seized its own tail, he had insight, and in a flash he awoke with the discovery of the structure of the benzene molecule. And Samuel Coleridge said that he wrote the Kubla Khan in a single drug-induced session. But Milton began Paradise Lost when he was 40 years old and finished it when he was 60. Einstein was special, but he didn't just see things. It took him 10 years to write and publish his first paper on relativity. And Kekule, as he said, on discovering the benzene molecule might be a ring, I turned my chair to the fire and dozed. Again the atoms were gamboling before my eyes. My mental eye could distinguish larger structures of manifold conformation, long rows, sometimes more closely fitted together, and so on and so on. Nah. He had two similar events. One 12 years before, when monkeys grabbed their tails, when he discovered a different molecule, and another where he again discovered snakes. He enjoyed telling this story. And Coleridge said it was written in a single drug-induced session, but we've discovered several carefully edited drafts that were found over many, many years, showing its gradual development. And Coleridge said he was in a opium days, but he was reading a travel guide just before his reported opium days. And if you take a look at the travel guide, in Xanadu did Kubla Khan build a stately palace encompassing 16 miles of plain grounds, and so on. And the final poem, in Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, well, he certainly made it more poetic, but it really wasn't just the result of an opium days. So why did they tell these stories? Imagine that you are Kekule, and you are addressing an audience of chemists at a convention, and you tell the story of falling asleep in front of a fire, and imagining snakes gamboling about and forming the structure of benzene, and you awaken with the final solution. Well, that's amazing. They wish they had dreams like that. They wish they thought like that. They wish they were that kind of chemist. But now, suppose you told them the truth instead. Why did I make these discoveries and others? Because I, Kekule, work harder than you do, read more papers than you do, spend more time examining different alternative structures of molecules than you do, and so I make more discoveries. Well, that's rather disappointing and unamazing, and they're not likely to stand up and applaud you for that. There are numerous examples in the history of science of great scientists working in seclusion or working in close partnerships. Newton, Darwin, Einstein, and more recently von Becchese, Linus Pauling, and Roger Sperry, all tended to work alone. On the other hand, there was Marie and Paul Curry, Watson and Crick, Hubel and Wiesel, Kahneman and Tversky, Simon and Newell. It's possible that working alone or in close partnership with another individual was helpful in a scientist or scientists being able to move against the zeitgeist of a field. However, this is in contrast to a good deal of modern science, which often encourages or requires working with teams of scientists. Perhaps future texts will simply refer to groups rather than individuals. Technology also contributes critically to scientific progress. Telescopes proved useful to Copernicus. A microscope was needed to discover the cell. I believe that reaction time devices and reaction time methodology was critical to the evolution of psychology and its emergence as a science. By carefully measuring the time between a stimulus and a response, psychologists could begin imagining what happened in between the two events, develop theories, and develop experimental tests of those theories. Synchronicity also is often critical. Multiple scientists working on their own to develop components of the ideas that led to penicillin is a clear example of scientists working apart and yet together. What I'm suggesting is that sometimes the moment of new technology, the state of questions, and the observations being reported lead to multiple researchers puzzling over the same problems to find solutions. Darwin and Wallace discovered similar models of evolution. Bell and Magendie discovered that motor and sensory nerves ran in different pathways. This diagram illustrates the Kuhnian process. We've already talked about Kuhn's model in an earlier session, so I won't comment more on it here. But how does one know that there is a revolution? I personally distrust all self-declared revolutions, the new psychologies, the third and fourth waves, and so on. Here are some of the ways where one might identify whether a revolution has occurred or is occurring in science. Keep in mind that we've had behavioral revolution claimed, a cognitive revolution claimed, a neuroscience revolution is currently being claimed, and repeatedly the humanists have argued that they are a new wave psychology. Keep in mind, however, that psychology as a discipline is very young. It's unlikely that we've had a revolution. In 1954, Kenneth Clark took a look at who was most highly cited in the psychological literature between 1949 and 1952. These tables were compiled by Hagbloom in 2002. Notice that only a subset of these individuals were behaviorists, suggesting that the so-called behavioral revolution wasn't as broad spread as suggested by many authors. Also, most of these psychologists did a massive amount of research, each of them publishing hundreds of papers over their careers. Of course, fame, even citations, doesn't necessarily mean the work will be mentioned in another 100 years. We will soon look at the world views of psychologists. You will find that the highly cited fit all types of psychologists. The majority of them conducted empirical experimental research, though not all of them. Scattered among them are a number who imagined a theory and then found some cases to fit the theory, but did relatively little empirical research, yet their ideas still resonate with some: Carl Rogers, Erik Erikson, Sigmund Freud. So how do you become one of these, a legend in your own time? Ulrich Neisser, who is frequently claimed to be the originator of the cognitive revolution, concluded, "To my mind, the lessons are clear. If you want to battle against the establishment to succeed, don't try to do it alone. Pick a fight where at least a small constituency is already on your side, ready to cheer you on and spread the good word. It's also wise to avoid negative rhetoric, speaking positively about your own cause instead of bashing the other guys." That's good advice. Here's my how to become famous. Work harder and longer. Read stuff outside of your immediate research area, because sometimes you will come up with good ideas and concepts from unrelated research. Challenge the zeitgeist, as Neisser said, with restraint. Or you can write essays that are great even if you don't do much research. John Watson didn't do very much research, but he wrote great essays. B.F. Skinner did a huge amount of research for decades and decades, but also wrote good essays. George Miller and John Dewey didn't do much research at all, but they wrote classic essays. So if you're an excellent writer, you might consider that approach. Think big. And finally, tell a good story.